She was 5 months pregnant when they threw her off the train. The winter of 1887 had sunk its teeth into the Colorado Rockies and refused to let go. Snow wasn't just falling, it was an invading army, a white wall moving through the mountains, erasing the world as it went. Inside the Northern Pacific locomotive, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool and coal smoke. Outside, there was only the piercing scream of the whistle and the howl of the wind. Her name was Eliza Harmon, and she was a widow. She clutched a thin shawl around her shoulders, a useless gesture against the cold that snaked through the rattling window frames. Her fingers, red and numb, traced circles over the small, firm swell of her belly. 5 months. The last living piece of her husband, Thomas, left in this world. Thomas, who'd been swallowed by the earth in a mine collapse just 3 months prior. Gone in an instant, leaving Eliza with nothing but a broken heart and the crushing weight of poverty. She'd spent nearly every last cent on this ticket, a desperate gamble to get to her cousin Sarah in Denver before the baby came, before travel became impossible. The mining company had called Thomas's death an accident caused by his own negligence. No compensation. The other miners whispered it was a faulty support beam, but whispers didn't pay for train tickets. "Tickets, ma'am?" The conductor's voice was like gravel in a tin can. He was a broad-shouldered man with a mustache so neatly trimmed it looked like a threat. His eyes scanned her worn dress, the small bundle of her belongings, and a sneer tugged at the corner of his mouth. He knew her type. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached into her pocket where the ticket should have been. She remembered folding it, holding it tightly as she boarded. But her fingers found only loose threads and empty space. Panic, cold and sharp, rose in her throat. I had it when I boarded, sir. It must have fallen." Her voice was a mouse's squeak against the thunder of the wheels. The conductor's face hardened into a mask of stone. "That's what they all say, ma'am. Ticket or payment. Otherwise, you're off at the next stop." "Please," she whispered, the words swallowed by her shame. "I've paid all I had. I'm traveling to my cousin. I'm with child. I have nowhere else to go." His eyes flicked down to her belly, then back to her face. There was no pity there, only cold, hard rules. Stealing a ride is stealing a ride. Company policy. Her hands trembled as she fumbled through her small bag. Her fingers closed around the last thing of value she owned, a silver brooch, her mother's. She held it out to him, a desperate offering. "Would this cover the fare? It's all I have left." He snatched the brooch from her palm, turning it over in his calloused hands. It wasn't just a clinical inspection. There was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Greed. He pocketed it with a fluid motion that felt like theft. "Not nearly enough for Denver," he grunted. "Then how far?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How far will it take me?" "Oak Ridge Station, next stop." His tone was final. He turned and moved down the aisle, leaving her alone with her terror. Oak Ridge. It wasn't a town. It was a water stop, a tiny, naked platform in the middle of nowhere. To be left there in this blizzard, it was a death sentence. 20 minutes later, the train groaned and began to slow. Through the ice-caked window, Eliza saw nothing but a vortex of swirling snow. A platform, a small sign creaking in the wind. No buildings, no lights, just the endless, howling wilderness. The conductor reappeared, flanked by a younger, brawnier guard. "This is your stop." "Sir, please," Eliza begged, one last, hopeless appeal. "The storm, my child, I won't survive." "Should have thought of that before you tried to cheat the railroad," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Now you can walk off, or we can assist you." The other passengers stared at their laps, at the floor, anywhere but at her. Their silence was a verdict. She was on her own. Shaking more from fear than cold, she grabbed her bundle and stood. The wind hit her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the platform. It stole the breath from her lungs and the warmth from her body in an instant. She turned back, a final desperate hope for mercy flickering in her heart. The guard slammed the door shut. The train began to move, its dark shape swallowed by the white void in seconds. It left behind a silence so profound it was like a sound itself, pierced only by the shriek of the wind. Eliza stood frozen, the snow already swirling around her ankles. Night was coming, and with it, a cold that would kill. But as she stood there on the verge of despair, she saw something. A glint of metal half buried in the snow near the edge of the platform. Her mother's brooch. He hadn't just taken it as payment. He'd dropped it. Or worse, he'd tossed it out after her. The cruelty of it, the personal, petty meanness, sparked something in her. Not hope, not yet. Rage. And that rage was just enough to make her take the first step. She stumbled off the platform, plunging into the deep snow. The tracks disappeared east and west into the storm. The mountains rose to the north, an impossible wall of rock and ice. South. The only option was south, down into a valley of pines that offered the slimmest chance of shelter. Drawing the useless shawl over her head, she began to walk, fighting for two lives against the crushing indifference of the storm. Survival instinct is a funny thing. It's a fire that burns in your core, and for the first hour, that fire burned hot in Eliza. Each step was a battle, sinking deep into the snow, the wind a relentless predator tearing at her thin clothes. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, focusing on the rhythm of her own desperate struggle. Then exhaustion began its slow creeping assault. The rage that had propelled her off the platform cooled, replaced by a fatigue so profound it felt like a sickness. Her limbs grew heavy, her thoughts sluggish. The forest had grown denser, offering some protection from the wind, but swallowing the last of the fading light. It was a maze of black trunks and swirling white. Just as she was about to surrender, to sink into the snow and let the cold take her, she felt it, a flutter, a tiny, insistent kick from within her womb. The baby, Thomas's child, a life that knew nothing of blizzards or cruelty, a life that was fighting just as hard as she was. The tiny movement was like a jolt of lightning to her soul. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She straightened her back, took a deep, ragged breath of frigid air, and pushed onward. Twilight bled into a deep, starless dark. The world was a canvas of black and gray. And then she saw it, a dark shape against the snow, a massive fallen pine, its uprooted base creating a small, natural windbreak. It wasn't a cabin, it wasn't a cave, but it was something. She stumbled toward it, collapsing into the small, protected space behind the roots. The stillness was a relief, but a temporary one. She knew with a chilling certainty that without a fire, this small shelter would become her tomb. The cold would seep in, and she and her child would simply stop. The thought should have brought despair. Instead, it brought a strange, sharp clarity. She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving, find real shelter, find help, or die trying. She tried to stand, her legs screaming in protest, threatening to buckle. She pushed herself up, leaning against the frozen trunk of the fallen tree, and that's when she saw it. Footprints, not hers. They were large, deep, made by someone with a long stride, and they were fresh. The falling snow hadn't yet erased them. Someone else was out here. Hope, fragile and terrifying, bloomed in her chest. She followed the tracks, stumbling into the deepening gloom, calling out with a voice that was barely a croak. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the wind answered, but the tracks gave her a direction, a purpose beyond just moving south. She followed them deeper into the woods, unaware that the man who made them was not just a fellow traveler. He was a hunter, and in these woods, in this storm, anything that moved was prey. Benjamin Wolfe had been tracking the elk for 3 days. It was a massive bull, one that could feed his people on the reservation for weeks. But the storm had ambushed him, its fury more intense than he'd anticipated. The elk's trail had vanished, erased by the blizzard. Reluctantly, he'd abandoned the hunt. Now survival was the only goal. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand. He knew the death traps of the open spaces, the meager shelter of the forests. He was heading for an old trapper's cabin he remembered, a few miles southeast, a place of last resort. At 32, Benjamin was a man caught between two worlds. Born to a Cherokee mother and a white father who had vanished like a ghost, he was raised in the tribe, learning the old ways from his grandfather. He moved through the blizzard with a quiet competence, his deerskin coat and fur-lined boots a world away from Eliza's town clothes. But even he could feel the deadly bite of the cold. It was the sound that stopped him first, a thin, reedy cry, nearly swallowed by the wind. It wasn't an animal he recognized. It sounded human. He paused, his senses on high alert. Predators grew bold in this weather. Wounded things were unpredictable. He moved toward the sound, silent as a shadow, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Then he saw her, a figure lurching through the snow like a drunkard. A woman, a white woman. Here, miles from any settlement, in the heart of a killer storm. The sight was so wrong, so out of place, it defied all logic. She was in the final stages of hypothermia. He could see it in her uncoordinated movements, the way she stumbled and fell, only to push herself back up with a grim determination that was both foolish and magnificent. "Hello?" he called out, his voice a deep rumble that carried over the wind. "Stop! Stay where you are!" She turned toward his voice. Her face was a ghostly white, her lips a terrifying shade of blue. Her eyes, wide with a wild mix of fear and hope, locked onto his. And then, as if that last ounce of strength had been spent, she crumpled forward and disappeared into the snow. He reached her in seconds, turning her gently onto her back. She was young, and as he moved to lift her, he saw the unmistakable swell of her abdomen beneath her thin, soaked clothing. Pregnant. The single word sent a jolt of fierce urgency through him. Not one life, but two. He shrugged off his heavy outer coat and wrapped it around her, then gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "Can you hear me?" he said, his face close to hers. "I'm going to help you. There's shelter nearby." A faint moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. It was enough. She was still fighting. The cabin was no longer a personal goal. It was their only hope. He set off, the woman a fragile burden in his arms, the storm fighting him for every single step. It felt like an eternity, but finally, through the curtain of falling snow, he saw the dark outline of the trapper's cabin. He kicked the door open. The inside was cold and dark, but it was salvation from the wind. He gently laid Eliza on the narrow cot against the far wall and moved with practiced speed. Fire. That was the first priority. The cabin's previous occupant had left a small stack of wood, kindling, and flint, the unwritten law of the mountains. Soon a small flame flickered to life, growing into a steady crackling fire that pushed back the deadly cold. Only then did he turn his full attention back to the woman. In the firelight, she looked even worse. Her skin was waxy, her breathing shallow. He knew what he had to do. Remove the wet clothes. It was an uncomfortable necessity, but her life depended on it. With a detached, clinical efficiency, he removed her snow-soaked dress and shawl, leaving her in her underclothes, and wrapped her tightly in the dry, rough wool blankets stored in the cabin. He positioned her cot near the fire, close enough for warmth, but not so close as to shock her system. As he worked, she began to stir. Her eyes, a deep brown that looked black in the flickering light, opened. They were filled with confusion, then a spike of raw fear. "Where? Who?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "My name is Benjamin Wolfe," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I found you in the storm. You're safe." "The train," she breathed, memory returning in painful fragments. "They put me off." "In this weather?" Benjamin's brow furrowed. "For what reason?" "No ticket," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her temple. "I lost it." A cold, controlled anger burned in Benjamin's chest. He knew the railroad companies. He'd seen their casual cruelty, their dismissal of anyone they deemed unimportant. But this, to abandon a pregnant woman in a blizzard, was tantamount to murder. He pushed the anger aside. It wouldn't help her now. "What's your name?" "Eliza," she replied, her voice a little stronger. "Eliza Harmon." He moved to the cabin's small cupboard, finding jerky and dried beans. He set a pot of water to boil over the fire. As he worked, he noticed something on the floor near where he'd placed her wet bundle, a small silver object, caked with snow. He picked it up. It was a brooch, intricately carved. He held it out to her. "Is this yours?" Eliza's eyes widened. She reached out a trembling hand. My mother's. I thought, the conductor. What about the conductor? Benjamin asked, his voice low. He took it, she whispered, as payment. Then he must have thrown it out after me. Benjamin stared at the brooch in his hand, then at Eliza's pale, earnest face. And in that moment, the pieces clicked together into a picture far uglier than just corporate cruelty. The conductor hadn't just been following rules. He had robbed her. He had taken her last valuable possession and then discarded it like trash after condemning her to death. This wasn't just negligence. This was personal, and it changed everything. The storm raged for 2 days, imprisoning them in the tiny cabin. It was a fragile sanctuary, a bubble of warmth and flickering light in a world of howling white. Benjamin kept the fire fed, rationing their small supply of wood. Eliza drifted in and out of an exhausted, healing sleep. When she was finally strong enough to sit up and share a meager meal of rehydrated beans and jerky, the silence between them began to fill with words. She told him about Thomas, about the mine, about her cousin in Denver. He listened with a quiet intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time in months. He told her about his life, caught between the world of his Cherokee mother and the white world that had never fully accepted him. He spoke of the reservation, of his people's struggle to hold on to their traditions as the world changed around them. A quiet understanding grew between them, two people from different worlds who recognized in each other the same quiet resilience, the same history of loss. On the morning of the third day, the wind finally died. The world outside was silent, buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, but the sky was a brilliant, aching blue. The storm has passed, Benjamin announced. We should leave soon. We need to get to Pine Hollow. How far? Eliza asked, a new anxiety taking root. Pine Hollow, civilization, but also the end of this strange, suspended time with the man who had saved her life. 15 miles, maybe, he said. The snow will make it slow going. He fashioned a poncho for her from one of the cabin's blankets and a walking stick from a sturdy branch. As they prepared to leave, he hesitated, then held out her mother's brooch. You should keep this safe, he said. Eliza took it, her fingers closing around the cool metal. He can't be allowed to get away with this, she said, her voice filled with a new strength. The conductor, what he did. One battle at a time, Benjamin said, his eyes meeting hers. First, we survive the mountains. Then we deal with the monsters. The journey was a brutal ordeal. Benjamin broke trail, his powerful legs carving a path through the deep snow. Eliza followed in his footsteps, her body screaming in protest, her lungs burning with the frigid air. They moved with an agonizing slowness, but they moved together. He never pushed her too hard, stopping for frequent rests, sharing the last of their food. He was a constant, steady presence, a shield against the vast, unforgiving wilderness. By late afternoon, the terrain began to change. They were descending into a valley, and then Benjamin stopped, raising a hand. Listen, he whispered. Eliza held her breath. At first, she heard nothing but the pounding of her own heart. Then she caught it, a low, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. What is it? She breathed. Someone's chopping wood, he said, a grim look on his face. We're close, but we're not the only ones out here. They moved forward with a new caution. The sound grew louder, leading them to a small cabin, much sturdier than the trapper's shelter, with a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. It was a miner's claim cabin, and it was occupied. As they approached, the door creaked open. A man stood there, an axe in his hand. He was big and bearded, his eyes narrowed with suspicion as he took in the sight of them. A pregnant white woman in a makeshift poncho, accompanied by a Cherokee hunter. Afternoon, the man said, his voice a low growl. He was blocking the doorway. Good afternoon, Eliza replied, trying to keep her voice steady. We've been caught in the storm. We're trying to reach Pine Hollow. The man's eyes flicked from Eliza's face to Benjamin's, then back again. The railroad put you off at Oak Ridge, didn't they? Eliza stared at him, stunned. How did you know? I was checking my traps near the station when the train stopped, the man said, his grip on the axe relaxing slightly. Saw the conductor force a woman off. Knew it was a death sentence. My name's Joe Taylor. I've been tracking you since yesterday. Was afraid I'd find you frozen. Relief washed over Eliza, so potent it almost buckled her knees. He hadn't been a threat. He'd been a guardian angel, following them, making sure they were safe. Come on in, Joe said, stepping aside. Storm's coming back tonight. Worse this time. An ice storm. You can stay here till it passes. There's plenty of food. Inside, the cabin was a haven of warmth and the smell of stew. Joe Taylor explained that the railroad, run by a man named Edmund Hargrove, had been cutting corners for years. They overworked their employees and treated their poorer passengers like cattle. The conductor, a man named Maxwell, was Hargrove's nephew, a cruel bully who felt untouchable. He's done things like this before, Joe said, ladling stew into bowls. Left a man at a remote stop last winter. They found his body in the spring. The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. This wasn't just one man's cruelty. It was a pattern, a system. They were trapped in Joe's cabin for another full day as the freezing rain coated the world in a treacherous sheet of ice. The three of them, strangers thrown together by chance and circumstance, formed an unlikely alliance. When the weather finally broke, Joe insisted on guiding them the last few miles into Pine Hollow. The town was a motley collection of wooden buildings lining a single muddy street. It was rough, but it was civilization. Their arrival turned heads. The sight of the three of them, the pregnant woman, the Cherokee hunter, and the gruff mountain man, was a story in itself. Their first stop was the telegraph office. Eliza needed to let her cousin Sarah know she was alive. The man behind the counter was a thin, weaselly fellow who looked them over with unconcealed distaste. As Eliza wrote her message, she saw the man's eyes widen. He glanced nervously toward the back room. Benjamin, who missed nothing, saw it too. He moved to stand by the door, his presence quiet but commanding. "Is there a problem?" Benjamin asked, his voice low and even. "No problem," the operator stammered, but he couldn't hide the sweat beading on his forehead. "Message will be sent right away." But as they left the office, Joe Taylor pulled them aside. "That operator," he said, spitting on the ground, "that's Maxwell's brother-in-law. Your message ain't going nowhere." It was a web, a conspiracy of bullies and cowards, all protecting each other. "What do we do?" Eliza asked, her heart sinking. "We find Mrs. Rollins," Joe said with a grim smile. "She runs the boarding house, and she hates the railroad more than anyone in this town." Mrs. Rollins was a woman built like a freight train, with iron gray hair and eyes that could strip paint off a wall. She listened to their story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Eliza finished, the woman was silent for a long moment. "Joe Taylor," she said finally, "go find Judge Foster. Tell him it's happened again." Then she turned to Eliza, and for the first time, her face softened. "You'll stay here, both of you, no charge. The railroad owes this town a debt, and it's high time we collect it." That night, Eliza slept in a real bed for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. But her sleep was troubled. She had survived the storm. She had found allies. But she realized her journey wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for justice. And in a town run by the railroad's shadow, justice was a dangerous thing to fight for. The next 4 days in Pine Hollow were the quiet before the storm. Benjamin found work at the livery stable, his quiet competence earning him a grudging respect. Eliza rested, her body finally recovering from the ordeal, and helped Mrs. Rollins around the boarding house. She and Benjamin fell into an easy rhythm, two people bound by a shared trauma that was quickly becoming something more. Judge Foster, an elderly man with a spine of steel and a deep-seated hatred for corporate bullies, took on Eliza's case with a righteous fire in his eyes. He'd been fighting the Sierra Pass Railroad for years, collecting stories, documenting their negligence. Eliza's story, witnessed by Joe Taylor, was the final piece he needed. He sent a formal complaint to the railroad's regional office, demanding a response. The response came in the form of a man named Edmund Hargrove. He arrived on the afternoon train, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the muddy frontier town. He was the head of the railroad, Maxwell's uncle, and he oozed a slick, confident arrogance. He expected to walk in, throw a few dollars at the problem and make it go away. Judge Foster arranged a meeting at the town hall. He made sure it was public. By the time Hargrove arrived, the room was packed with the citizens of Pine Hollow, miners, shopkeepers, mothers with children. They were there to watch. Hargrove's face tightened when he saw the crowd. This wasn't the private, discreet negotiation he'd planned. "Mrs. Harmon," he began, his voice smooth as oiled machinery, "the railroad deeply regrets any discomfort you may have experienced. We are prepared to offer you $50 and a ticket to Denver to resolve this matter." A wave of angry murmurs swept through the room. $50, the price of a human life. Eliza stood up, her voice shaking but clear. "Discomfort, Mr. Hargrove? Your conductor, your nephew, robbed me and left me to die in a blizzard. That's not discomfort. That's attempted murder." Hargrove's smile didn't waver. "Those are serious, unsubstantiated allegations. In fact," he said, pulling a document from his briefcase, "we have reason to believe you are a known grifter, Mrs. Harmon. This is a sworn statement from a conductor on another line who says you attempted the same lost ticket scheme just last year." The room fell silent. Eliza stared at the paper, her mind reeling. It was a lie, a complete, vicious lie designed to destroy her credibility. "That's not true," she whispered, her voice failing her. But just as despair threatened to swallow her, Judge Foster slammed his hand on the table. "A convenient document, Mr. Hargrove. Perhaps you'd like to see my documents?" He produced a thick file. "This is a statement from the widow of a man your railroad left to freeze last winter, and another from a family whose son lost a leg because of your faulty equipment, and another, and another." He spread the papers across the table. "You're not dealing with one desperate woman, sir. You're dealing with a town that has had enough of your greed." Then Joe Taylor stood up in the back of the room. "I saw it," he boomed, his voice filling the hall. "I saw Maxwell throw her off that train. I saw him toss her brooch into the snow after her." The telegraph operator, dragged to the meeting by Mrs. Rollins, began to tremble. Hargrove told me to bury her message," he confessed, his voice cracking. "He told me to lie." The room erupted. Hargrove's face went pale. The trap he had set for Eliza had snapped shut on him instead. His confidence evaporated, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered rat. By the end of the day, the settlement was no longer $50. It was $300, the return of her brooch, a public apology, and a lifetime pass on any Sierra Pass train. Hargrove fled town on the evening train, his reputation in tatters. Maxwell, the conductor, was fired and facing criminal charges. That night, Pine Hollow celebrated. Eliza was no longer an outsider. She was their hero. Through the celebration, she found Benjamin standing quietly on the edge of the crowd, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You found your voice," he said. "I had good teachers," she replied. "Survival teaches courage." The legal battle was over. The monsters had been faced. She had enough money to get to Denver and start a new life. But as she stood there, looking at the man who had carried her from the brink of death, she realized something. She didn't want to go to Denver anymore. "I'm thinking of staying," she said quietly, testing the words. "The school needs a teacher. I could rent a small house." She trailed off, her heart pounding. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains, dark shapes against the starry sky. "Pine Hollow is a good town," he said finally. "Would you consider staying too?" The question hung between them, more fragile and more terrifying than anything she had faced in the storm. He turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face in the torchlight. "My place in this world has never been firmly set," he said. "Not fully Cherokee, not fully white. I've always lived between worlds." "Maybe that's why you could see me," she said softly, "when I was caught between life and death. You understand what it's like to be on a threshold." A slow smile touched his lips, a rare and beautiful thing. "The reservation has other hunters," he said. "But you—" He paused, the unaccustomed words catching in his throat. "I need you," Eliza finished for him, her voice firm and sure. "Not just for survival, but for what comes next." The world had tried to break them apart, throwing them into a storm of ice and cruelty. But in the heart of that storm, they had found each other. Their journey wasn't ending in Pine Hollow. It was just beginning. Spring came to the Rockies, and with it, new life. Eliza used the settlement money to rent a small two-room cabin at the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was a home. Benjamin, with his skilled hands, helped her patch the roof, build shelves, and construct a small porch. He rented a room above the blacksmith shop, but he spent most of his waking hours at her cabin, their lives intertwining like the roots of the ancient pines. The town council, impressed by her courage and education, hired Eliza as the new schoolteacher. She poured her heart into the one-room schoolhouse, teaching children who were hungry for knowledge. Benjamin's reputation grew as well. He was more than just a skilled carpenter and hunter. He became a bridge, his understanding of the mountains and their secrets invaluable to the growing town. Their relationship was the subject of endless town gossip. The White Widow and the Cherokee man. They ignored the whispers, their bond forged in a crucible of survival that no one else could understand. They were a world unto themselves. As summer approached, Eliza's belly grew round. The child, the life she had fought so hard for, was thriving. One warm May evening, as she sat on the porch correcting essays, the town sheriff approached, his face grim. "Mrs. Harmon," he said, twisting the brim of his hat, "got some news from Denver. That conductor, Maxwell, he's been arrested. They connected him to other thefts, other abandonments. The man Joe Taylor told you about, the one they found in the spring, that was Maxwell's doing too. They want you to testify." A trip to Denver, just weeks before her due date, was impossible. She provided a sworn statement instead, closing the final chapter on that dark story. Justice, it seemed, was finally grinding its slow way forward. "Does it bring peace?" Benjamin asked her that night as he worked on a cradle he was carving from a single piece of pine wood. "Not peace," she said thoughtfully. "Completion, a circle closing, so a new one can begin." And their new circle was about to begin in earnest. "This cabin is small," she said, watching his hands smooth the wood. "It's small for two, let alone three." His hands stilled. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "The school board offered to help me find a larger place after the baby comes," she said, her heart hammering. "I'd like you to consider living there, with me, not as a friend, as—" The words failed her. "We could marry," he said, his voice quiet but direct. "Judge Foster would do it." The suggestion hung in the air, both a practical solution and a radical declaration. A marriage like theirs would be a scandal to some, a testament to others. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "A marriage for legitimacy?" "What I want," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, unshakable truth, "is to be by your side, and the child's, to provide, to protect. The name they give it doesn't matter. The substance is what matters." "Then let's wait," she decided, "after the baby comes. Let's build our family first, and then decide what to call it." His hand found hers in the twilight, a rare gesture that spoke volumes. They would do this their own way. The baby came on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. It was a girl, healthy and strong, with a cap of dark hair and her father's solemn, watchful eyes. They named her Grace, holding her daughter, looking at Benjamin standing beside the bed, his face filled with a love so profound it radiated like heat, Eliza knew. The circle was complete. They were married by Judge Foster 3 months later in a simple ceremony on the porch of their new, larger cabin. The town watched, some with approval, some with disapproval, but all with a sense of awe at the story that had unfolded in their midst. The woman who arrived half-frozen and hopeless was now a beloved teacher. The mysterious hunter was now a respected citizen. They were a family forged not by convention, but by courage and an unbreakable bond. 5 years passed. Pine Hollow grew, and so did the Wolf Harmon family. Grace was a bright, spirited child, moving easily between the worlds of her parents. The railroad, the force that had once tried to destroy Eliza, now brought books and supplies that enriched their lives. Then a letter arrived. It was from the Cherokee Eastern Band Council, Benjamin's people. They were in a desperate fight with the government over land rights. They needed a representative, someone who understood both sides, who could translate not just words but intentions. They were asking Benjamin to come home. The request felt like a tremor, threatening the stable world they had so carefully built. It would mean leaving Pine Hollow, her school, their home. But Eliza looked at her husband's face and saw the weight of responsibility, the pull of his heritage, and she knew what her answer had to be. Then, another complication, another life. Eliza realized she was pregnant again, a new baby, a move across the country, a life among a people who were not her own. The challenges seemed insurmountable, but they had faced the impossible before. "We should go," she told Benjamin, her voice steady with a conviction that surprised even herself. "It's right for our family, for Grace, for this new baby. They deserve to know both sides of who they are." Their decision was met with sadness in Pine Hollow, but also with understanding. Their story had always been one of movement, of crossing boundaries. This was just the next unexpected turn in their path. They left in the spring, traveling east on the very same railroad line that had brought Eliza west in desperation years before. As the train pulled away from the station, Grace pressed her face to the window, watching the town disappear. "This is where it all began, isn't it?" she asked with the profound wisdom of a child who has been told a great story many times. "Where Mama was lost and Papa found her." "Yes," Eliza said, her hand finding Benjamin's. "This is where it began." The journey to the Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina was a journey into another world. They built a new home, a new life. Eliza taught at the reservation school, subtly weaving Cherokee history and culture into the government-approved curriculum. Benjamin became a vital leader for his people, fighting to protect their lands and their way of life. Their son, James, was born that summer, a strong, healthy boy who further cemented their place in the community. Their family was a living bridge, a testament to the idea that two different worlds could not only meet but merge, creating something new and strong. Years later, they returned to Pine Hollow for a visit. The town had boomed, but it still held the spirit of the place that had given them a home. Old friends greeted them like long-lost family. Judge Foster, now frail but sharp as ever, had a surprise for them, the deed to a small parcel of land he had held in trust for them, in case you ever decided to come back. The land became their anchor, a foothold in both worlds. They would spend most of the year on the reservation, raising their children, serving their community. But summers would be spent in Pine Hollow, allowing their children to experience the other half of their heritage. On their last day, they stood on the platform of the new Grand Train Depot. Grace, now a young woman with her mother's intellect and her father's quiet strength, looked down the tracks. "The same train that tried to harm you is now what connects our two homes," she said. "Full circle," Eliza murmured. "What was meant for harm became the start of something beautiful." As the train carried them eastward again, back toward the mountains of their adopted home, Eliza looked at her family. Benjamin, her partner, her rock. Grace, her brilliant daughter, already dreaming of the college the railroad's trust fund would pay for. James, her son, sleeping peacefully, a child of two traditions. Their path had never been easy. It had been carved through blizzards and prejudice, through hardship and loss. But it was a path they had chosen, a path they had forged together. The howling wilderness of that Colorado winter had seemed like the end of the world, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of a legacy, a story of survival, of love, and of the incredible, unbreakable strength of the human heart. If you were captivated by Eliza and Benjamin's journey, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We post stories like this all the time, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And be sure to check out the video on your screen now. It's a story about a lighthouse keeper who vanished without a trace, and the mystery will keep you guessing until the very end. Thanks for watching.